So, you genuinely went vivid on the mood board. Don't worry chat, you came to the right place. Many people have been voicing their opinions on cenat's new fashion label, some calling it performative and others praising this mature transition from streaming. I'm of the opinion that people should chase their dreams no matter what, so I wish the best for Kai in his endeavor. But one thing I noticed he could improve in his early process can be seen in the background of this image. The mood board and inspiration process is the foundation of any fashion collection or even just a garment, which means that this step can make or break an entire project before you begin to even sketch or sew anything. In this video, I want to reinforce the importance of a good mood board and guide you through the process of making one like a professional fashion designer. To start, we need to define the different types of mood boards because yes, there are multiple types. Depending on your role or employer, you can work with either mood boards, concept boards, or trend boards. Mood boards are abstract collages of items that guide the central theme of a collection, outlining potential design elements like color or texture. Concept boards get a bit more specific and may include actual design elements that you may want to replicate. Trend boards are made with what is popular now or predicted to be popular soon, so designers can essentially copy silhouettes, colors, materials, or anything else that should theoretically turn profits in the market for the upcoming season. In this video, I'm mainly going to focus on mood boards because that's what will lead to the most unique results. But first, I want to elaborate just a little bit more on why a good mood board is so important. Obviously, since gathering this inspiration comes early in the design process, it will have ramifications that echo throughout the entire process until they manifest in the final clothes that get presented to the customers. But beyond that, it is important to spend time curating new and important ideas in order to evolve fashion forward and carve out a unique voice against all the noise, as opposed to watering down old products that have already existed and changing, let's say, 3%. Filling a mood board with things that already exist will lead to nothing but repetitions and stealing of ideas, whether on purpose or subconsciously. But by taking a little bit more time to dive into niche media references and even do a little bit of, sorry to say this word, but research, you can design things that nobody has seen before and tell new stories. So, with that in mind, let's go over the elements needed for a strong mood board. The first element is story. This isn't mandatory, but whenever I make a mood board, I like to imagine it as a story. Typically, I'll either have the story in mind from the inception, or create a story along the way and finish it at the end, using the sources of inspiration as a guideline. For this instance, I want to start with a story to use as a compass for curating the rest of the inspiration in the video, but of course with the potential to alter the story at the end depending where the mood takes us. It's just a loose idea to build off and keep us going. For this story, I want to imagine a court jester in medieval times and all the situations he would be placed in and how he could use humor and laughter as his primary means of navigating life's ailments. For this, I'm inspired by some media I've been consuming recently that talk about people who play the fool, when in reality they are quite smart and use humor as a deceptive technique, almost severing themselves into a separate entity to do so. With that in mind, let's look at silhouettes. Perhaps the most important part of any garment is its silhouette, or shape. Inspiration for shapes can be found anywhere, but common ones include anatomy, architecture, nature, or geometry. For my jester-inspired looks, I want to lead into the rigid, pointy shapes associated with the jester's costume. To do so, I found some paintings and architecture that I like the shapes of. I also like the idea of a jester as a sacred being, like an angel entrusted to deliver important messages. So, I want to lean into some sacred geometry as well. The next element is color. Most people say color is the first thing you look at when buying a garment, so it is just as important, if not more important, than silhouette. There are infinite sources of inspiration for color. Many stick to neutral and trending colors, and of course houses have their own iconic colors. For my colors, I found an abstract painting with the tones that I'd like to replicate, as well as the album artwork from Lost the Cat, whose music has been inspiring me lately, specifically the title song The Mocking Stars. I want to end up with a color duo, since that was what was traditional for a jester's costume, to differentiate them as a separate class than all the others who would make appearances in the king's court. The next element's a fun one. We have texture. Clothing is obviously tactile, so how something feels is crucial to how it's designed. Texture allows you to experiment in this realm, whether you use fur inspired by animals, or soft billowing linens inspired by the clouds, or harsh painted garments that crack and crumble as the models walk. I like the sharp textures from my silhouettes, but imagined in three-dimensional forms. I think it gives the impression of something beautiful but untouchable at the same time. Likewise to the guarded nature of jester's privilege. I also found some worn leathers to show the time and its effects on someone with such a stressful job. Next up, we have symbols and patterns. Symbols aren't always necessary, but they can be an easy way to communicate messages to an audience, which means you have to be very careful when selecting them. The same goes with patterns. Classic patterns can be emblematic of certain ideas, but they can also be recontextualized. I want to pay homage to classic gesture patterns such as stripes and diamonds, but update them for a modern context. I also like this painting, which shows many different symbols, communicating the multifaceted skill set of a jester and the quiet power that they juggle between multiple realms. Finally, we have the actual mood, or the world. If you're making an entire collection, you may want to have some elements of the world in which your characters would live in to dictate the necessary utility of the garments or justify their colors and textures against the backdrop. I always like to imagine the world a garment would live in, even if it is just a single piece. What forces of nature would it have to go up against, for example, or what buildings would it be walking through? What projects would the wearer have to accomplish while adorned in your robes? For my world, I found some churches and castles I liked, as well as some jester archetypes to lean into, specifically those who are guarded behind darkness or mask to separate their foolish self from their truish self. I also like this archival photo as inspiration for if I was presenting the collection in a lookbook format, so as to show through photography the duality represented throughout the collection. And now we can put all the elements together in a big mood board so they can build upon each other and possibly even lead to more ideas. This was just a quick exploration that I did based on a random thing I was interested in at the moment, but hopefully it gives you an idea of the things you should seek out when compounding your own piles of inspiration. One of my favorite music artists, Ash Gutierrez, or Glaive, describes his songwriting process like filling a bucket with water. In the metaphor, he describes his head as a bucket, and all the books, films, art, and music he consumes as the water to fill it up. Once the bucket is full, he says water overflows and spills out of his head, and those are the songs he writes, emptying the bucket onto his pages until he can find time to fill it up again. I think the same goes for fashion inspiration. There's a slow build of consuming intentional references that fill your head until you can use your hands to make them into something new and real. Speaking of great artists, let's look at some fashion designers for a professional insight into finding inspiration. Before looking at them, I think I should emphasize that there's no such thing as a perfect mood board. Each brand or designer will have their own process and purpose for finding inspiration that will define what they're composed of. But some mood boards are definitely better than others, and now that we're familiar with all the components, I want to share insight into two people who I think can be beacons of light in this area, even though they are avant-garde in their nature. The first is Rick Owens, whose originality and nuanced design process have cemented his place in the history of fashion. The hallmark of any good designer is a design language that you can tell is theirs without any labels. The bold silhouettes, color palette, and textures in any of Rick's products are instantly clockable as only having been able to sprout from his brain. But how did Rick find the inspiration to develop his look in the first place? I think the primary clue to unlocking the Rick Owens archetype of mood boards can be found in his upbringing. As a child, Rick's father didn't let him watch television and pushed him to craft his young mind by consuming classic literature, music, and art. This pushed Rick to obsess over the idea of the pursuit of perfect beauty, and because of that, his clothes reflect the constant pursuit of that desire, acting as an evolutionary story as opposed to other houses whose shows each season could act as separate entities. Furthermore, the importance of high art as inspiration is reflected in Rick's work. Instead of scrolling through Pinterest, Rick is strolling through museums and archives for old shapes and ideas that he can mold into his world and reflect new concepts. Rick actually doesn't make mood boards at all, and in fact he hates them.
I don't like mood boards. So I don't want a literal example of my references in front of me. I like kind of having references that are vague, that I kind of force myself to have to use just as a memory instead of a visual example.
But even if he isn't making literal mood boards, his desire to embrace obscure references that are personal to his life and vision is an attribute I think we can all take to heart for our own pursuits of artistic beauty. The other designer I want to highlight for their inspiration process is Henry Alexander Levi. A self-proclaimed artist, due to his background at art school before starting his fashion label, his inspiration process is unique to him. This makes sense, considering his brand, Enfance Riche de Prime, is full of elements and perspectives that are purposefully unique to Alexander and his life. Instead of making straight-up mood boards, Levi makes collages, combining his sketches and paintings with imagery that inspires him. In interviews, he says part of his process for designing a collection starts with surrounding himself with art and music, allowing himself to drown in it before translating it through his hands into sketches and ideas that will end up in stores and on runways. Levi actually has a physical space based around collecting rare media for people to bask in, called the Anti-Public Library. I've never been there since I think it's in France, but they sometimes post cool books and posters on their Instagram, so you should check that out. When looking at Levi's clothes, you can see the elements of a collage represented in each of his looks, which are made to be separate characters in his world. Each model is swathed in unique fabric symbols and silhouettes that, when styled together, perfectly form a fully fledged character who could have their own backstory even beyond the story told by the collection itself. In case you want to find more interesting reference points for inspiration but don't know where to start, I'm going to quickly give some jumping off points. First and foremost, I love to find inspiration in books. Art books, fiction books, anatomic reference and science books, anything. Whenever I go to the library, I always try to pick out at least a real book, and then check the reference books or magazines section and just pick some things that jump out to me. Another good source is art museums. I usually can be found here at least once every 2 months, taking pictures of the art that inspires me and looking up the artist when I get home. If there isn't an art museum in your area, you can try to look up online art archives or even go to antique stores. Antique stores are almost museums in their own right, and I always see fun trinkets there that spark random inspiration. Even just walking around your city or neighborhood, you can find inspiration in the nature and the buildings around you. Beyond that, being selective about the media you consume is also crucial to developing a healthy balance in the bucket inside your head. I definitely rot my brain a bit more than I should, but I try to counteract it by reading books or watching classic films or reading essays or listening to podcasts about topics that interest me. But even all this I've talked about is just the tip of the iceberg, and you never know what random stimuli will click in your brain, forming your next big idea. Hopefully, this video has enlightened your mind and expanded your horizons for finding inspiration. Now that you're a mood board expert, go have fun curating and building your worlds, but remember what Rick Owens says. Anyone can make a mood board, but a real designer actually has to make clothes. With that in mind, I think in one of my next few videos, I'm going to take you through my process of actually making a garment from start to finish, so subscribe if you want to see that, I guess. As always, this has been Liam Daniel for Patchwork Television, where we make something out of nothing. Thank you for everything.
And when the two-step spins you around